Okay, hi. So today I want to make a video of a compilation of book recommendations that deal with the unethical history or modern history of medicine. First off, I want to say that this list is very American-centric or Western-centric when you look at the historic context of some of these. And that just has to do with the types of books I've read. I think that everyone comes to the medical field, going to doctors, their feelings about prescriptions and pharma and the drug industry from very different perspectives based off of where you're from, based off of your cultural background, based off of your racial background, and the way that people have been treated by the medical field through time. I think that with the talk of the Hippocratic Oath, with the talk of like the regulation of things, with how long and extensive it is to become a doctor, to practice medicine, to become a surgeon, we see these fields, maybe, I don't want to speak for everyone, but we see these fields as trying to benefit the general population and be an ethical place. And that is not really what the history of the medical field looks like, and that's not really what modern medicine always looks like as well. Not to say that there aren't doctors who attempt to do this. And so I want to talk about 4 books that I have read that kind of talk about this from different angles. Let's get into it. So I'll try to go a little bit chronological, and this one might feel out of place, and it's the one I read most recently. This is called Dark Archives: A Librarian's Investigation into the Science and History of Books Bound in Human Skin by Megan Rosenbloom. So this was a fascinating read. I think that it's maybe a little too gruesome and macabre for some people. Some of it is about just the history of books that have been made out of human skin. The author herself is a librarian, and a librarian specifically kind of centering herself in medical libraries. So a lot of these books that get discussed in this book were bound or are related to doctors in some capacity. This book kind of bounces all over the place, and so it's not like a specifically medically focused nonfiction, but it does continuously go back to this concept of, is bookbinding in human skin ethical, or is there an ethical way to do it? And the answer for a lot of these texts is no, it wasn't ethical. There was no consent given with respect to the human body. It gets into some of the legal perspectives of that, because legality changes from place to place, and a dead body isn't necessarily a human and isn't necessarily property in some contexts of the law. But a lot of the time, these skins were stolen. And it kind of goes into a little bit of the history of, like, how did doctors in the 1800s get bodies? How did they get cadavers? How were they able to dissect in order to see into the human body? It slips in and out of talking about the books and talking about medicine, and I found it really fascinating. It talked a little bit about how the medical field kind of in Western society has where it evolved from, and that kind of gives you a good basis for where it's going to go to. The next book I want to talk about is mentioned in Dark Archives, and while I was reading Dark Archives, I thought about this book multiple times. And this is called Medical Apartheid: The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present by Harriet H. Washington. So this book really speaks about the unethical medical practices that were done to the Black body in the United States since settlers came. It's discussion is specifically about the Black body, though you can find works about, or I think it even does kind of speak a bit to the atrocities that are done to Indigenous individuals as well, specifically Indigenous women. And this kind of speaks to why, from a cultural perspective, some people in different communities, specifically the Black community in this example, come to medicine from a different perspective than white people in America. Because this book really tackles the fact that these things happened and these atrocities happened to the Black community during the time of slavery, but the practice of dehumanizing Black people and using the Black body for the gain of white America, and this, looking at it specifically through the medical field, never went away. The atrocities that were done in the pursuit of gynecology, in the pursuit of syphilis care, in the use of non-consenting use of Black dead bodies, the list kind of goes on and on. And it shows a trend that never really went away, and kind of ends with, yes, maybe America in the end put these things in place to make these sorts of practices illegal, make it illegal to do it on incarcerated people, which is more likely to be Black individuals if you look at the statistics, and but bring those things elsewhere, to Africa, and consistently still have these unethical practices occurring, just changing where you're doing them. I think that this book specifically gives you like this one's very specifically medically focused, very specifically American focused, contextualizes like where Western medicine came from and where it continues on to. And this gets me into my two next books I want to talk about, which are more present day. So the next book is called Empire of Pain, The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty by Patrick Radden Keefe. This is about the opioid crisis. It's not completely about it. It's about that dynasty, that family, and it looks at it through the context of that family and that family's impact on the opioid crisis that started sweeping the nation in the 2000s. Pharma doesn't have a good reputation, and there are a lot of good reasons for that, and this is a good example of one. This book touches on the pushing of a pharmaceutical company to sell their drug and doing it through unethical means. So lying, saying that opioids last longer in the system than they actually do, saying that they're not addictive, lying again. Very suspect things happening between this company and the FDA and the approval of this medication, and certain things that are missing on the patient insert and the medical guides that are used to help prescribe this. And then the amount of money that was put into the company, not to make the drug necessarily, but to market it, and the heavy amount of marketing, and then the pill machines and like these doctors that were just consistently prescribing them, even when people began to understand in the public sphere the consequences of these. So this one is more looking at the pharma side of things and the harm that this one family in this company in this type of drug has done to public health and is still a crisis today. So I can't have this video without talking at least about one serial killer in the medical field. So the book that I'm talking about is The Good Nurse, A True Story of Medicine, Madness, and Murder by Charles Graeber. This is about Charlie Cullen, who was dubbed by the media as the Angel of Death. He was a nurse that killed many people by having close access to them. He is by far not the only one. And you could look at this and say, okay, well, you're looking at the perspective of a serial killer and a bad actor in this scenario. But that's not really what happened if you go into this text. And it's not just a bad actor. It's a bad actor that never received consequences. He never received consequences. Even though people knew strange things were going on, it's the image that these hospitals wanted to protect. So they would not do inquiries. They would not go in and look more. They wouldn't work with policing bodies necessarily. And they're trying to hide the fact that there is a serial killer amongst their midst or not look into it because they don't want their reputation to be on the line. And it is these medical institutions that do end up protecting these bad actors. So you might look at it and be like, well, it's one immoral person, but is it an unethical system that props them up? So that's another kind of side of unethical medicine that you can look at. And it's really incredible too, because it's not just one hospital. Like, they would let him go, but his license wouldn't be revoked. He'd be able to still practice as a nurse and would just go on to the new place and start this all over again. It speaks to a systemic issue, and it speaks to the fact that it's not just one bad actor. It's not just one bad nurse. It's not just one unethical person in charge. It's a system that you do sometimes have to question how ethical is it as a whole, even today. Okay, and the last one I want to talk about, I couldn't have a list and not put this on because this is one of my favorite nonfiction of all time, and that's Bad Blood by John Carreyrou. This is looking at, if you've heard, now there's a Hulu show about her, Elizabeth Holmes, the company Theranos, a startup in the Silicon Valley, and that's really the angle the book takes with this, is the discussion of this startup in the time in the Silicon Valley where it was really coming into life, and the number of investors that she got to invest millions of dollars into some product that didn't exist. But the product itself was medical devices. It was things that were supposed to take a pinprick of your blood and be able to do hundreds of different tests on it. And the medical device couldn't exist because technology was not there. And the people that worked for her and were asked to do this impossible task knew this. This is a case where this all came to light because of people's morals, because of whistleblowers amidst NDAs and being followed around by people in the company. Reading it would have been quite terrifying being one of these whistleblowers in this situation. It's kind of just interesting to see how she and her company skirted past the law. Making medical devices, having a lab, you are still held to regulatory standards in the United States. But when they came to do a inspection of the lab, there was a fake lab. The real lab was behind a door they weren't allowed into. When they got a test result they didn't like, it would just disappear. And they just changed the results. These devices, this technology that never worked in the first place, was never thoroughly vetted, was validated, and it wasn't. It was fake data. Got into CVS's. It might have been CVS. It was some sort of pharmacy store like that. And people were getting wrong results from these things. Actual patients went in and got blood tests, and some of them knew that they got false positives because then they went and did follow-up tests, and who knows how many people got false negatives and just didn't know. It's an interesting line of the bobbing and weaving of the regulatory system and the regulatory bodies that are meant to protect people, and a question of, did in this instance those regulatory bodies do their due diligence, or was it really, in this case, one bad actor. Those are the 5 books that I had on this list. I would love if people have recommendations for different books, leaving them down in the comments. I'm particularly interested in finding anything about the history of medicine from a non-Western background, because I do recognize that a lot of what is now considered Western medicine were practices that did not originate in Western society and were learned from others, and don't necessarily get the credit for that within the Western gaze. So that is all I got for this video. I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, happy reading.